The rule was simple: do not land a PBY Catalina in the open ocean. A patrol plane could search, circle, drop rafts, and call ships, but it was not supposed to put its hull into heavy Pacific swells unless there was no other choice. On August 2, 1945, Lieutenant Robert Adrian Marks reached a patch of sea where the rule and the men below him could not both survive. Under his aircraft were sailors from USS Indianapolis, scattered across miles of water after more than 3 days without rescue. Some were burned by fuel oil. Some were delirious from thirst. Some no longer had the strength to reach the rafts that fell from the sky. Marks had not come to become part of the disaster. He had come to report what he saw and render aid from the air. But when he looked down, he saw the difference between a regulation written on land and human beings dying in the water. The aircraft was not built to be a lifeboat. That day, he made it one anyway. The story began with a mission almost no one aboard the ship fully understood. USS Indianapolis was a heavy cruiser, fast, experienced, and battle-scarred. In late July 1945, she carried components connected to the atomic bomb that would soon be dropped on Hiroshima, delivering them to Tinian under great secrecy. After that, she was ordered toward Leyte in the Philippines for training and preparation for the next stage of the war. The crew had reason to believe the hardest part of the voyage was behind them. The ship had crossed dangerous water before. The war was nearing its final weeks. Men on board thought about mail, food, sleep, and the ordinary habits that return even in wartime. But just after midnight on July 30th, Japanese submarine I-58 fired torpedoes into the darkness. 2 struck Indianapolis. The explosions tore open the cruiser with such force that men were thrown from bunks. Corridors filled with smoke, and the ship began to die before many aboard understood what had happened. Within about 12 minutes, Indianapolis was gone. There was no long, organized abandonment. There was no clean roll call, no orderly line into enough boats, no clear accounting of who had made it out. Around 300 men went down with the ship. Hundreds more were thrown or forced into the water, many with only life jackets, debris, or small groups of wreckage to keep them afloat. The sea was dark, and the ship that had been their whole world had disappeared under them. Dawn did not bring rescue. It brought heat, thirst, oil on skin, and the first full view of how far apart they were. Men called out names and heard only water. Some formed groups to keep one another awake. Others drifted alone. Salt water burned their mouths. The sun punished them by day, and the night took back their warmth. What made the disaster worse was the silence above them. Their ship had been expected to arrive unless reported otherwise. No alarm rose in time. For days, the survivors remained where no one was looking for them. By the morning of August 2nd, the men in the water had reached the edge of endurance. Some had hallucinated. Some had swallowed seawater. Some had been injured in the sinking and were getting weaker by the hour. A man in a life jacket can still die in open water if no one comes. That morning, a Navy patrol aircraft flown by Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn spotted heads below him during what had begun as a routine flight. From the air, they were so unexpected that at first the crew had to make sense of what they were seeing. The ocean was not supposed to be full of men. Gwynn dropped what he could and radioed the position. Other aircraft and ships were sent. The rescue system finally began to move, but the men below had already spent 3.5 days learning how slowly help can come. When Adrian Marks and his PBY Catalina were sent toward the scene, he did not yet know he was flying into one of the worst sea disasters in U.S. Navy history. The PBY Catalina was a strange and useful aircraft, part airplane and part boat. It could patrol long distances, search wide areas, and operate from water when conditions allowed. It was not fast, and it was not graceful in the way fighters were graceful, but it had range, endurance, and a shape sailors could recognize from far away. For men lost at sea, the sound of its engines could mean the world was finally looking for them. Marks and his crew arrived expecting to help from above. They saw men spread across the water in groups and singles, some waving weakly, some too exhausted to signal at all. The crew dropped life rafts and supplies, but the drops did not solve the problem. One raft was damaged. Others landed too far away from men who no longer had strength to swim. A raft in the ocean is only rescue if the living can reach it. Marks watched that distance become unbearable. The plane could still fly away. The men below could not. Standing orders existed for a reason. Landing a large flying boat in open sea was dangerous. Swells could strike the hull, damage the floats, tear the aircraft apart, or leave it unable to take off again. A PBY was valuable. Its crew mattered. A pilot who lost the plane might turn a rescue mission into another emergency. Marks understood that. He also understood what he was seeing. The official version of duty said preserve the aircraft so it could keep searching and reporting. The human version of duty said there were men dying close enough to see their faces. He consulted his crew. This was not a casual decision. If they landed badly, they might all be injured or stranded. If they stayed in the air, some of the men below would almost certainly not last. The sea was rough, with heavy swells. The PBY was not going down into a calm lake. It was going into the same water that had been punishing the survivors for days. Marks chose the water. The landing was not a clean picture from an aviation manual. The Catalina hit hard. The sea slammed at the aircraft, and the impact damaged it enough that its future as a flying machine was already in doubt. But it stayed afloat. That was all that mattered in the first seconds. Marks began taxiing across the water toward survivors. The crew started pulling men in. The first men aboard were not passengers boarding a rescue craft. They were wrecked human beings being taken back from the edge. There was not enough room inside. A PBY could carry men, but not the number Marks was now trying to save. The fuselage filled. The crew kept taking survivors anyway. Some were placed wherever space could be found. Then men were lashed to the wings with parachute cord. The aircraft that had been protected by a standing order became a floating raft, crowded, damaged, and overloaded. Every added man made takeoff less possible. Marks kept adding them. By the time he was done, 56 sailors had been taken from the water. The number matters because it shows the scale of the choice. This was not one dramatic pickup. It was a sustained decision to sacrifice the aircraft piece by piece. 56 men meant weight, movement, injuries, fear, and desperate exhaustion packed into and onto a machine that was never meant to hold them that way. Some of the rescued men were tied outside because there was simply no other place left. The Catalina could no longer be treated as an airplane waiting for a chance to depart. It had become a platform of survival. Marks had crossed the point of no return. His plane could not safely fly again. In a military system built around equipment, orders, and mission preservation, that was a serious cost. In the water around him, the cost had another meaning. Each man aboard was a life not left behind. Even after Marks landed, the rescue was not over. The ocean was still wide, the light was falling, and many survivors were still out there. Ships had to find the scene. USS Cecil J. Doyle, a destroyer escort, became one of the first surface vessels to arrive. Its captain, W. Graham Claytor Jr., made a decision that echoed across the water. He used the ship's searchlight as a beacon, pointing light into the sky so other rescue vessels and survivors could see where hope had finally gathered. In wartime, a bright light could also be a risk, but the men in the water needed a sign. For those who had drifted for days, a ship's light was more than navigation. It was proof that they had not been forgotten forever. The Doyle and the other ships began pulling men out of the sea. They removed survivors from Marks's damaged PBY as well. The aircraft had done its last work. When the rescue was complete, it could not be recovered, and it was sunk. Only a fraction of the men who had gone into the water survived. The number usually given by the Navy is 316, though some survivor records count one more. The difference does not soften the disaster. More than 800 men did not come home from that voyage. Indianapolis became a story of torpedoes, secrecy, missed reports, exposure, thirst, and delay. But inside that larger tragedy is the smaller, sharper story of a pilot who reached the scene when the rules still gave him a way out. He could have stayed above the water and still claimed he had done his duty. He could have dropped rafts, marked the location, radioed ships, and preserved the aircraft. No one would have needed to invent an excuse for him. But the reality below him was too clear. Some decisions in war are made in offices, some in briefings, some in the narrow space between a pilot's eyes and the men he can see dying beneath him. Marks made his decision there. That is why the rescue remains powerful decades later. It does not erase the failures that allowed Indianapolis survivors to remain lost for so long. It does not turn the disaster into a simple story with a clean ending. Many men were already dead before Marks arrived. Many more could not be saved. The Pacific did not become merciful because one aircraft landed. But history is often carried by the moments when one person refuses to hide behind the limits of a system. Marks did not have enough rafts. He did not have calm seas. He did not have permission to turn his aircraft into a rescue platform. What he had was fuel, a crew, a flying boat, and a line of sight to men who had almost run out of time. He used what he had. That is not a perfect victory. It is something more human, a costly act done when every safe option was already too small. For the men who survived, the memory of aircraft overhead could be overwhelming. A plane could mean rescue was coming, or it could mean another pass, another drop too far away, another hour in the water. When Marks landed, the sound changed meaning. The machine that had circled above them entered their world. It was suddenly close enough to touch. Men who had been reduced to heads and arms in a vast sea became people being pulled aboard by other people. That difference matters. In disaster, distance can make suffering abstract. Marks closed the distance. He did not save everyone, and he never could have. But for 56 men, the impossible thing happened. The aircraft that should have stayed above the waves came down among them. The title of hero is often given too easily in wartime stories. In this case, the word is hard to avoid, not because the choice was clean, but because it was costly and immediate. After the war, Adrian Marks did not become the central name most people remembered when they heard USS Indianapolis. The sinking itself, the ship's secret mission, the long wait, the shark attacks, and the later controversy around responsibility often dominated the public memory. Marks's role sat inside that memory, sometimes honored, sometimes passed over too quickly. He received the Air Medal, and those who studied the rescue understood what he had done. But his decision deserves to be seen clearly on its own terms. He was not simply a pilot who arrived at a disaster. He was a pilot who accepted that the aircraft entrusted to him might have to be spent to buy minutes for men who had none left. There is a quiet severity in that kind of choice. It does not need exaggeration. The facts are enough. Open ocean, exhausted survivors, standing orders, 1 PBY, 56 men. When the Catalina was sunk after the rescue, it disappeared like another piece of wartime equipment lost to the sea. But its final hours had changed its meaning. It had taken off as a patrol aircraft and ended as a lifeboat. It had been damaged not in combat, but in the act of landing where it was not supposed to land. That is the image that remains. A flying boat sitting low in the swells, men packed inside, men tied to the wings, a crew still working, and a rescue ship's light rising into the night. The story is not about disobedience for its own sake. It is about the moment when obedience to a rule would have preserved a machine and abandoned men who could still be saved. Adrian Marks did not make the ocean safe. He did not undo the sinking. He did not save every survivor of Indianapolis. But he looked down, understood what the rule would cost, and landed anyway. There is another reason this story stays with people who learn it. It forces a simple question without giving a simple answer. What is a rule worth when the situation that rule was written for has already broken apart? In normal conditions, the order made sense. A patrol plane lost in the water could not search for anyone else. A damaged aircraft could endanger its own crew. A pilot who turned one emergency into two might cost more lives than he saved. Marks was not choosing between a good rule and a bad rule. He was choosing between a rule that usually protected lives and a scene where that same rule, applied without judgment, would leave visible men to die. That is the hard part. Courage in this story was not loud. It was not a speech, a charge, or a final stand. It was a pilot taking responsibility for an exception that no manual could safely write in advance. It was a crew accepting the consequences with him. It was an aircraft being used until its value as equipment became less important than its value as shelter. When people talk about USS Indianapolis, they often remember the horror first, because the horror is impossible to ignore. They remember the torpedoes, the darkness, the days in the water, and the terrible delay before rescue. But alongside that horror, there should also be room for the rescue decisions that kept the survivor count from being even lower. The Doyle's light mattered. The aircraft searches mattered. The ships that arrived through the night mattered. And the Catalina that could not take off again mattered because it proved that even inside a failed system, Individual judgment could still reach the water. For the 56 men who climbed, were lifted, or were tied onto that plane, the question was not whether the aircraft would be written off. The question was whether they would live long enough to see a deck under their feet again. Marks answered with the only action that could reach them in time. He accepted the damage, accepted the loss, and accepted that some people would later judge the decision from safer ground. The men in the water did not need a perfect rescue plan. They needed someone close enough to act before another hour took them. That is why the phrase "landed anyway" is not just a thumbnail line. It is the whole moral center of the story.